We're going to call the meeting of the Ad Hoc Capital Debt Committee to order on May 20th, 2024. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Director Photo?
Present.
Director Sullivan?
Here.
Director Cummings?
Here.
Alderman GOV?
Here.
Alderman Clee is here. Alderman Clemens?
Here.
Alderman O'Brien? Alderman Wilshire?
Here.
Mayor Tonches?
Here.
And also Alderman Dowd.
CFO Griffin, and that's who I see right now. We're going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Cummings very quickly, but he's sort of categorized these projects in a way that he'll describe. There are maybe at least one or more that are really required. For example, the hydroelectric facilities, those improvements have to be made if we want to relicense those dams for electric generation. And there could be others, but otherwise we thought we would go through the list, answer any questions you have, and then do a little bit more before 7:30 when the Human Affairs Committee is going to meet. Mr. Cummings.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So what I would like to do is recap what we've heard ever so briefly using the chart that's up in front of you. This is a part of the minutes of the very first meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee. I failed to print this out. I apologize. So please bear with me. But if you wanted to look it up, it is on the Ad Hoc Committee Agenda Center. And so with that being said, I was just going to quickly tick through these various requests by the various departments, and then talk about some categorizations that I did, to eventually hopefully lead us to what the pleasure of the group may be relative to developing a capital expenditure and debt service plan over the next 5 years. So with that being said, we heard from the police department, the 9 Riverside training facility at $3.5 million. There's a parking lot redesign and reconstruction at $500,000, and then a booking area that needs to be redeveloped, which they don't really have a good number as of yet, but we're using $2 million as a placeholder. Public Health has a request for $5 million for a low barrier shelter and transitional housing. Fire has a deferred capital maintenance request of about $1 million for the reconstruction of the Amherst Street floor, and then we have the roof at Conant Road that needs to be done at $500,000, and then the replacement of station number 5, which we often refer to as the airport station. Library, if we do a complete rebuild and/or new project, we have $25 million, or just as a deferred capital maintenance, and the most imminent item that needs to be done is the masonry and windows at around $3 million. Clerk's office had a request for voting machine equipment at $100,000. Emergency management, we discussed previously, where I had outlined that they would be looking to put their request into the separate building projects as new initiatives come about and come forth through the city. Economic.
Alderman Clemens.
I'm sorry, maybe you can go through and then
Okay.
I'll ask my question after.
Economic Development has the parking garages at $15 million, some placemaking of $1 million. Beta property project, I consulted with the Director of Economic Development earlier today. She suggested that could get removed off of the list. And then a wayfinding signage initiative at $1 million. DPW garage at what is contemplated here at $30 million. Greeley Park at $1.3 million. Holman Stadium improvements at $7 million. A paving program needing, starting in '27 for $4 million, and then pool and decking across the city for $75,000 deferred capital maintenance. Community development, hydro project improvements at $7.5 million. Quadrant 1 implementation of the riverfront plan at $250 million. Community rail extension, just the design work at $1.5 million. Mohawk Tannery pedestrian bridge connection, $3 million. Milliard dog park at $1.5 million. Admin services at about $1 million for a city hall HVAC upgrade necessary, deferred capital maintenance. A city hall renovation, a little bit larger in scale, at $2 million. Mobile device management system at $100,000, and then a Lawson upgrade needed at $1 million, with the various requests for by the departments. But that is not all the needs that we have. We have some other various requests that should be noted that we anticipate. Walnut Street Oval project, West Pearl Street project, Heritage Trail East project, Factory Street sidewalks, West Hollis Street, Main Street, various projects necessary to continue with the infrastructure upgrades of the city along the way. And along with that, other infrastructure projects necessary, or deferred capital maintenance, or just general improvements to the city that we should keep on the horizon. The truck wash bays, that's getting folded into the DPW garage project, so we're going to move on from there. Generator project, that's the emergency management project. That's going to get built into the various building projects moving forward, so we'll move on from there. But we have the Keefe renovations. We have miscellaneous school for deferred capital maintenance necessary. New fire station, so this would be an additional fire station necessary. A senior center renovations, Riverside Drive athletic fields, that would be 2 athletic fields. Court Street improvements necessary. Fiber loops for our infrastructure, our information and technology infrastructure. And then Mount Pleasant School renovations at $25 million, all listed out, non-departmental requests as of right now, but still these items are something to be aware of as we continue to move forward. So with that being said, Mr. Mayor, I can stop right there and take any questions before I move on to my next sheet, if you'd like.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, I had a question because when the fire chief was in here, he said that the floors for Amherst Street were gonna be around 600,000. Do we have updates? Is that why it's $1 million?
I believe the floors for the Amherst Street is not really known at this time, to be fair, and I believe he believes it's gonna be somewhere between 500,000 and $1 million. But that is getting to a good point that I actually kind of want to talk to in a few moments. But right now, I'm going a little bit more on the high side, just to be safe, because we actually don't have any design work done yet on the project.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, it seems to me some of these numbers have changed since the last time we've seen them. And like the public health building, when they came into capital improvements, it was 3.5, now it's 5. You know, that kind of inflation will never get there. But the other thing is, you got schools, I believe, like, it's hard to read, but I think it's 10 million?
10 million.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that the 10 million bond that's already in
No.
place? And what other 10 million are you talking about? Because I'm not aware of it.
I think we're talking deferred maintenance, aren't we?
Yeah,
The idea of funding that?
Oh,
Yeah.
10 million?
Isn't that what we're talking about there?
Yes, Mayor.
I put a note, not actually.
I'm sure that Sean Smith would be doing handstands if you gave him 10 million in deferred maintenance.
Yeah,
He asked for $1 million for this year, and 350,000 of that was the building analysis for all 20 buildings in the school department, so we'd know exactly what needed to be done and when. And that, I think, may be funded a different way, other than a bond. And until that's done, we wouldn't know what any of the projects were.
Well,
So
that
that
first
10
off,
million, I'm not sure what that represents.
So right here, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
yeah, go ahead.
So, so this is the list he provided us, and essentially what he's talked about is year over year, this is what they're requesting, so, you know, you can kind of add it up, it adds up about around-ish, you know, 10-ish million dollars that they're gonna need for deferred capital maintenance. That doesn't include the various projects that they got on the horizon that they would like, and they've outlined Mount Pleasant, and then I think New Searles at something like 15, 20 million on top of the deferred capital maintenance. So I'm just going off of the data that they provided us during our presentation.
So there's a couple things. One, that's in a perfect world, and two, until they get that study done, these numbers are just good guesstimates. And you've got 20 buildings, and you know, when are you gonna renovate them? That's still up in the air. I mean, as far as the deferred maintenance, there are also things in the deferred maintenance, I think, that can be funded different ways, rather than a bond, if we're only looking at bonds. But,
Well,
know,
these are
I-
these are just estimates. All the projects are estimates.
Yeah.
And nothing on the list is something that has to be done. I mean, in the sense that the whole point is to prioritize these, so maybe that doesn't get priority. I mean, but it's still a possible project. All right, anybody else, questions? Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have on my sheet, the spreadsheet you put up there, the notes that I done under fire, I did have the 600,000 for the Amherst Street floor. I had 400,000 for the Conant Road roof. But then when it came down to the replace Pine Hill Road Airport Station number 5, he had spoke about $19 million.
And then also, if you notice, he came in with an additional project that isn't even
Right.
on this list.
$2 million.
Which is a $2 million request for a quote-unquote training facility.
Right.
So that was, you know, all new to that conversation, and we could add that $2-ish million to this list if you'd like. But again, these are all just rough estimates, that we're using the best data that we have at this point, and I am being very conservative in my approach for planning purposes at this time. I would welcome a conversation where we reduce some of these items down, but I just would hate to put you in a place where we reduce it down so much that, you know, maybe you have to come back later on and increase these numbers.
Following?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess the question that I have is, something that we kind of brought up at our last meeting was to kind of get a feel as to when we thought that these projects were going to be happening. So for instance, if the training, I know it's not on the list here, but if they said that the training could be 2027 or 2028, it makes a difference as to how we're going to look at that one. I know that's the one that's over at the landfill that they're looking at, but also when I look at the Amherst Street floor, that may be something that's more of a priority. I really need to know which ones are the priorities that we have to. And you mentioned a couple that, as we were going through, obviously, in my opinion, the paving program, something we don't want to let slide. So we want to keep something like that going and so on. How do we go about determining, is this group going to determine what the priorities are? Or have the department said this is a must do or die?
This would be a recommendation to the Board of
Yeah,
Aldermen.
we are tasked with
Okay.
coming up with recommendations of priorities. But Mr. Cummings has additional comments related to some of the questions here, so you want to go ahead?
So we further did exactly what you're talking about now, which was we started to develop some high-level categorizations of these various projects. And so for us to be able to start to talk about categorizing them in a way that made sense. And so, and when I say made sense, make sense in a way about where they stand in the timeline of project development. So potential bonding of projects that are vetted and ready for construction. These would be imminent projects. You have potential bonding of projects vetted with sufficient community support, but maybe not yet designed. This will be a public document that I'll email
Oh, no,
around.
it's easier for me to see it here, that's why I did it. I can bring it up on my screen here.
Potential bonding of projects needing additional policy guidance, community engagement, and further study is necessary. And then eligible capital projects not using debt service. So over the course of the last 2 or so weeks, CFO Griffin and myself, along with Comptroller Evans, have been having a real conversation about what would make sense to be put in a category for debt service. And I believe at this time, this will be new policy guidance we would recommend to you all to consider, but do not bond anything over under $1.5 million. So anything that would be under $1.5 million, it's our suggestion that we find ways to fund it on alternative means like cash. And there's various strategies that we could take to be able to do that. Again, this is a conversation that is evolving, and I'd welcome everyone's input on how you'd like to structure it, but we could look to increase the capital budget within our annual operating budget by a certain dollar amount and do a few projects there. Or we could look to do it during the escrowing process at the end of the year, and we could do it there as well. But nonetheless, what we really wanted to emphasize to you all is making sure that we really only look to bond projects that are over 1.5, and that's a rough guide. I mean, we could absolutely do projects that are a little less, little more, but as a rule of thumb, we want to suggest that anything that is under 1.5, we try to use cash. Now, there is a caveat to that, and that would be for projects, for capital equipment that is in our SURF program, or that we have already a program in place for our capital equipment investments, or like our fire trucks and whatnot. But if it's a project not otherwise programmed, we believe that would be a good policy for you all to consider.
Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. I think that's a good goal. However, it concerns me because that requires the board on some of these projects to figure out where like a surplus may be in an escrow at the end of the year, or how you would do it. And I'm thinking specifically about things like the Amherst Street Fire Station and the floor that needs to be done, right? That I feel like that's an imminent thing that probably is a priority on this list that needs to get done, and it needs to get done soon. So if the only way to get that project done is to bond it, then because we don't have a plan in place yet to get to we're going to not bond anything under $1.5 million, then I think we need to put that on the table and not just disregard it, because I think there are certain things on here that, like that, where we may have to, this year at least, consider doing that.
As far as that project, is there anyone working to come up with an absolute price? I mean, there's this wide range of estimate. I mean, can we come up with was the fire department working to come up with an actual on that one?
I can address that.
Alderman Dowd.
Yeah, I've talked to the chief, and they're not gonna know for sure until that study gets back, which they expect in the fall. And they'll have an estimate coming out of that will be closer to reality, because when they take a look from an engineering standpoint at Amherst Street, there's a range of possibilities. It could be fix the floor, completely fill the basement with cement, and so you don't have to worry about the floor anymore, or close the station. There's a number of options, and they won't know till the engineering analysis is done. Again, that's why, like, if we did the study with the schools, we'd have 20 buildings we'd know more about. But
So I think Mr. Cummings has some thoughts on going to design before project costs are authorized.
That-
Why don't you discuss that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, one of the recommendations, again, in speaking with CFO Griffin and Comptroller Evans and myself, one of the ideas we want to float by you all is moving forward to actually get status on the debt service plan. We would recommend that a resolution be passed by the Board of Aldermen that basically says something along the lines of we agree and we recommend and we want this total project to proceed. And then in addition to that, look to start to authorize design funds, which you may use cash for, or some other alternative resource, not necessarily debt service, to be able to start and begin the project. That will help inform the price and the cost of the total project as you go on, and then you authorize a total project cost once you get a little bit further in design. And so, again, that's a recommendation that we would make to you all to consider as we move forward with this. We could start to implement that now, but while we're in this interim phase, if you will, we also developed a solution that would also move projects along where we believe there is sufficient community support, but those projects aren't necessarily designed, and we recognize that as well. And so that's why we created the categorization like we have.
Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, again, I think I'll just state again, I think that's a great goal to have, but my fear in that is that if we have something right now that is a need, it's almost like we need to figure out what our list is when the timing is on the list, like Alderman Clee was saying, and then figure out, okay, if it's a project that has to have design work done because it's imminent tomorrow, then we need to figure out where that cash is coming from, or we need to decide, yes, we're just gonna bond the $1 million or whatever it is.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Alderman Clemmons, before we get there, can you just humor me that we go through this exercise that I'm about to take you through? And ask you all to kind of talk about what your priorities are. And I'm gonna ask you to exclude projects that are less than 1.5 million, and we'll exclude projects that we know we have some sort of obligation to do. But really, I'd like to hear from this group what your recommendation is relative to your priorities. And we could do 4 and 5 if you'd like here. But I haven't heard yet from you all as to what you'd like as your priorities. And once we do that, we can move it to that next phase that you're actually talking about.
All right, so what we're thinking about here is we don't vote tonight. We just kind of go around and each give maybe priority number 1 and a reason or 2, hopefully briefly. We've only got another 36 minutes. Just so, and then think about what everybody has said and come back at some other time. Yes, Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, I'm not prepared to do that tonight because what I need to see is a list of things that, again, like the hydro dam, the bridge for the Mohawk Tannery, the Amherst Street floor. I need to know what the total amount is of things that we absolutely need to do that are required, and then I need to subtract that from the total amount and then figure out from there what my priorities are. So I'm not prepared to do that. I need all of this information ahead of time. So I thought we were gonna get a spreadsheet tonight to look at some of these things. I'm not prepared to do this.
So, no, we talked about the projects, the list of projects that are designed and ready to go. I mean, that's another thing that is worth understanding. Did you have a spreadsheet on that? You did, but I told you, or someone told you.
Yeah.
Hold that off for the moment.
So if we want to jump all the way to that level, we can absolutely do that. I really want to I don't want this to come off as the Cummings plan, right? But in trying to do what the group asked for, I obviously took some liberties. So with the caveat of understanding that this is, what I heard from the group as the priorities, or where it fell in the project timeline creation, I did do what Alderman Clemmons asked for, and I can absolutely show that to you all, which may help inform the conversation. So, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have actual projects approved, and those actual projects approved are right here, and there's a spending plan already associated to them. So we're going to discount those for the time being because they're a fait accompli. We have an obligation to do them. Understanding and recognizing that we have a paving program that we need to implement. It was the DPW request of $4 million starting in '27. We're doing that as outlined here. The reason why this is in green is because I want to make a recommendation to you all that over the next few years, we as a team make a concerted effort to build this cost into the operational budget of the DPW. And so you'd be shifting the debt service payments and putting it into the DPW operational budget. You're not going to be able to do it right away. They would never meet guidelines that were asked of them, but we really should be starting to layer this operational cost into the department's budget. Similarly, there's a conversation to be had about deferred capital maintenance. And
All
so,
right, can I just stop you there on the paving? So we have a 10-year authorized paving program, but this suggests that at the conclusion of that, we need to begin to spend $4 million a year to maintain the quality, the character of the paving that has been accomplished over 10 years. That's what the $4 million is. Anyway, go ahead.
thank you, Mayor. So the next is programming of debt service and/or some sort of capital expenditures for the schools. And so understanding what their requests are, and they looked for about 15 million. I'm suggesting that we program about 9 million, or at least that's what we can afford, and still be reasonable for all the other projects is my recommendation to you all. Noting the fact that we already have about 34 million of school projects already committed in this 5-year plan. So that would be on top of the school spending already authorized. And that's up to you all as to how you'd like to proceed with that. It doesn't count any of the new school type of construction. And again, one of the reasons why this is in green is because maybe there's a way to create a new section in the budget. Maybe we put it in contingency. Maybe we look to create a new area where it stays within general government's control. It doesn't go over to the Board of Education because, as you know, just because it goes over to the Board of Education doesn't mean they'll spend it in that way. So you could look to create a control there if necessary. But because we know that this is going to be a routine reoccurrence year over year, it's something that you may want to consider, and I wanted to flag that for you.
Just real quickly,
Yes, Alderman Dow.
any major project that would come out of that, any major spending would have to come back to be approved by the Board of Aldermen anyway. Even if it's deferred maintenance. Let's say it's $1 million to do the paving at Nashua High North. It would have to come back here. Because any bonds or any expenditures would have to at least go through finance. So, and
Yep.
I don't think the school department would ever try to spend it a different way. I've gone down that road and trust me, the people that use this deferred maintenance would let everybody know that was happening.
So then another category created was, as I mentioned, potential bonding of projects that are vetted, ready for construction and imminent. And so we have the Riverside project, that's the training facility. We have the parking garages. The reason why the parking garages are in blue, these are the public parking garages, is because we know that there's some revenue that could be generated. And we're not going to suggest that we could generate enough revenue to cover the entire cost of that $15 million expenditure, but it's something to note and to keep in the back of your mind that we might be able to offset it in some way. Reminder that this is a general obligation bond. Next is the pedestrian bridge for Mohawk Tannery site. We believe that this is going to be a contractual obligation that we're going to be committed to doing, though we're not going to necessarily need to do it until much later on in the 5-year plan, but we wanted to accommodate for it. Next is the library project. And so one of the things I'm suggesting is we do at least the masonry and windows repair until we actually understand what the library project actually is. And that's $3 million, and we have that programmed in as well. And we could certainly do it at another point in time, but nonetheless, I think there's some design that would be necessary. So it's probably not going to really come into our debt service plan until the mid of the 5-year range. Hydro improvements, same as the public parking garages. Those are going to be offset by some revenues. Though this project is imminent, needs to be done sooner rather than later, we're going to need all $7 million. $7 million or $7.5 million, Matt?
7.
7, that's what I thought, okay.
Take 7.5 though, if you'd like.
Yeah, no. Moving on down, again, everything above this line here, we can accommodate. As you can see, we're under the we are under the 150 million. So that's the real thing that you need to keep in the back of your mind is we're staying south of this 150 million, and we've got it. We have all these projects programmed if you so choose to proceed with them. So next, and again, these are projects that we believe that are sufficiently supported by the community, but we're not necessarily at a design level yet. And I would recommend moving forward, we start to think of these projects in a different way, and we start to get design if we're wanting to move forward with the projects. We have City Hall renovation. This is not the HVAC program that I was talking about. This is more of a general renovation that we need for City Hall, the bathrooms and whatnot. So we can push these out a little bit later in the timeline. Next, you have the DPW garage. I've increased the budget to 40 million because I believe that that's probably a little bit more appropriate as to where we're at because we haven't started any design yet. I'm carrying it all a little bit later on. We already know that we have $2 million already authorized from the office admin building project that we're hoping to repurpose. So the design could be taken care of without new authorization. This would just be for construction of the DPW project, and it does include the idea of the wash bays. Next would be deferred capital maintenance, which we do believe is imminent to some of the comments that were made earlier. This would both be for the roof and the flooring, and we have it carried very early on in the project for about 1.5 million. But again, we don't really know until we start design what the project costs are gonna be, but we wanted to carry something to make sure that we have a reasonable plan that we can stand behind. We have Holman Stadium for $7 million, which again, we believe some of these projects are more imminent than others. We've broken it out over the next few years, but we know we need to do that field lighting sooner rather than later. Next is a Main Street rehab project, which we're suggesting that we carry 20% of the $30 million in case we don't necessarily get grant funded, or if we do get grant funded at a lower dollar amount, we'll be able to match it. And we have that money's programmed in, again, a little bit later on. And we know we have the senior center project and that we're gonna need to do, but we're not necessarily sure when that's gonna come up, but we know we're gonna need it, so we have that programmed in. So let me just walk you through how this is arrived at. So this is all adding up to 150 million, and that's over the 5 years. Now you can see, and we'll move these monies around if we're all in agreement on these projects, so long as we stay at that 150 mark. But you can see in the first year, we're over our target by about 25 million. That means the next year, we're not necessarily gonna need to spend as much as we have the ability to, or authorize as much money as we have the ability to, and we'll slowly bring the number down until it balances and it equals, you know, this will eventually come to 0, and you'll see 30 probably right in and around here again as we balance it out. Let's talk about some of the columns that I created, some of the categorizations that I created. So this is just an FYI for you all. So to date, we currently have approved 34 million in bonding for that would be part of this 5 million plan. In addition to that, The schools in this current plan would get an additional $9 million if that's the desire, and that would be for the deferred capital maintenance. It's just something to think about. Potential bonding of the paving program, I believe we have that in at $4 million over 3 years, which is $12 million. And then we have the potential projects needing additional policy guidance, community engagement, and further study necessary. So this is where we really need to talk about whether this is an appropriate categorization. But it goes to the further point that I wanted to make here, which is all these figures have not been designed yet, so we don't really know the associated costs. And I want to make a recommendation that to move any project up onto that chart or list moving forward, that we start to entertain doing a resolution, and then we do the resolution encompassing two things. One, that we're committed to the total project based on the projected cost, and then we start to do some design, and then we reevaluate, and we look to authorize total debt service when we know what the construction costs are. And so with that being said, you can see, I believe it's, additional conversation is going to be necessary relative to the shelter. And so whether that's $3.5 million or $5 million, right now I don't think it's necessarily ready for a conversation that it should be part of our debt service plan. You could say the same thing with our library project. It's not very clear to me whether the library project is a rebuild of the current existing building or if we're going to be looking at a new structure. But nonetheless, it's definitely something that we know we're going to need to do over the next few years, and we should start planning for it. Next is the replacement of the airport station. Again, another worthy project that I think we're going to need to really start to look at. And maybe we start to look at designing some monies putting some monies aside for design, but I think more community engagement and policy directions necessary before we do anything. Similar to Mount Pleasant Elementary School. So we know that is a conversation that needs to be had. I don't believe it's actually been had yet. Well, that's why it's in this column right here. You could say the similar with Keefe Auditorium. You could say the similar thing with Court Street Theater, the athletic fields that are being suggested, and then this new fire station, quote unquote, station number 7. So again, that's all subject to conversation, but one that I wanted to put before you this evening. And then following the prior list, we did exactly what we talked about, which is identifying projects that were under 1.5 million and putting them in a separate category where we will look to use cash to pay for them. And so over the coming, and we can do this over the next couple weeks, but we would start to categorize these in the years that we'd like to program them over the next 5 years to accommodate the various requests as necessary, and not even look to disrupt our debt service plan. We can also start to look at having conversations about, by doing it this way, about maybe alternative funding sources, whether that may be doing the library project in a public-private partnership, whether that's a way of looking at doing the Keefe Auditorium through a public-private partnership. But that's where it goes to the idea of more policy guidance and community engagements necessary, further study, and why we've set these types of projects in this area, and it's not necessarily rising to the level of the debt service. Then finally, I was asked to think about projects that could generate revenue to help offset the debt. That's why they're in blue. And then these are the projects that we have some sort of obligation to, and I'm going to say that obligation is whether this body and the city of Nashua is still committed to the projects, but these are the various transportation projects or infrastructure projects that have been put before the state at various times, and some of them predate the current administration, but they're coming due, and we know that we need to, have a funding source, have a bona fide funding source so we can enter into project agreements. That's very important. I have ideas as to how to do that. One of those ideas I've been speaking to CFO Griffin about is we're going to create, what I would recommend is we create an expendable trust fund for these matches, and we set those aside over time. And so therefore there's match monies available, so there's more confidence to enter into these project agreements, which may not come up for 8 or so years, and it would help us from a planning perspective to know that we have monies set aside. So this is a draft plan that I put together that I believe, makes everything work from my perspective, staying true to that
So
$150
within
million.
this spreadsheet, we have one or more members of the committee who, well, first, shortly before 7 o'clock, Alderman Lopez and Alderman Sanat arrived. So we want to put that in the record. But one or more members of the committee have suggested that we need to look first at a list of things that we regard as absolute necessities. I suppose the hydroelectric, because that's part of the licensing, the floor of the station, maybe other things. Within this spreadsheet, is there a category that covers those items?
So those were items that we programmed pretty much very early on in the projects, in the project list here. So not necessarily imminent, other than we have the design and we're ready to go, is the police training facility. Imminent from a public safety perspective, there's no question. We're gonna need to do the public parking garages sooner rather than later. We know we have an obligation for the hydro, and so that's the 7 million there. Then relative to the fire, we know that there's about a 1.5 million that again, we could look to forward fund it here in a year earlier. We just know that we would have to balance it out in the later years.
What's the 1.5 for?
The 1.5 would be for the roof and the floor for the various fire stations. And that would be Amherst Street and Conant roof, if we were to look to do that. And then we know we need to start doing some Holman Stadium upgrades sooner rather than later. That's a priority. But we don't need to do everything right away. We can phase the project. The big thing that I believe we need to do is the field lighting. And again, that could be accommodated sooner rather than later.
All right, so you're saying that because the parking garages downtown face the possibility of damage and collapse is an exaggeration, but further damage.
The weather.
Whether that needs,
Mr.
that's a
Mayor.
necessity, you're saying.
Do-
And
Yep.
we've got the fire station situation. Are the roofs as important as the floor and the,
That's my understanding. The roof
All
and
right,
the
so we've
floor
got
are
that.
imminent.
we got hydro, what else is on that list?
And those are the imminent projects that would require debt service. Then we
And
haven't.
Police Riverside, we've already authorized that, right? Or we're in design and we've at least morally committed to it.
That's right.
Okay.
And then, but then you get into what is imminent at this level right here, which is the 1.5 or less. Some of these projects are more imminent than others. And we haven't started yet the conversation about really drilling down as to which one of these are imminent, but I can tell you this one. This HVAC is imminent from a mechanical standpoint. We are gonna need to replace our mechanical systems here in the building, and so we would start to plug this in what I would say is FY, again, whether we did it during the escrows or we did it next year in FY '26, that is what we would be looking to do with some of these projects here that would be considered more imminent. Some of them are imminent because we have that contractual obligation, such as Walnut Street Oval and Heritage Trail East. These are imminent projects because we have New Hampshire DOT wanting us to sign projects, agreements with them, or we know that they're over what we have budgeted, so we need additional money set aside for them. So,
And that is our match
and
for
that is our
those
match
two.
requirement. Yes.
And these are in design, or one is designed and the other designed. That's Heritage, that's the rail trail, and the Walnut Street Oval is in design, right? Correct?
That's right, Mayor. Yes.
And the Greeley Park situation, I think Public Works will tell us that that could collapse. You know, not, again, an exaggeration, but, you know, this really needs repair. It's like the garages. Alderwoman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things here is, it would have been nice to have this spreadsheet, and I understand it was a decision not to necessarily go there. But the items that are match and so on, I know from the Lock Street, we talked about that. The Lock Street, we got that in 2018 approved, and here we are still fighting whether or not we're gonna be getting the money and how much and so on. So I really would like to kind of get an estimate, even at those match monies, when we think we have to have those by. I think we should look to the operating budget or escrows or something like that for those type of items. But I would like a list, like I said before, of those things that we really eminent. I mean, my neck is getting sore just trying to look up there to see which ones it is. And I started writing things down and I finally gave up on it. I'm not ready, like Alderman Clements, I'm not ready to give you a decision as to what my priority is. My priority is gonna be based on what is an absolute need. I mean, so I look at an absolute need as the fire station floor, you know, and the roof, you know, something that the HVAC system for the city, the Elm Street garage. I mean, I have all those because those are eminent. And I'm not gonna be foolish and say, let's do this over those things that have to happen. So, and I really don't wanna put my opinion out there until I know which things really are important, because that is going to be the basis of my opinion.
Alderman Clemens.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So, going down to that list of things we could potentially pay for in cash, can you scroll down to that? So, you know, I tend to think of things in a different way than most people do, which is sometimes good and sometimes not.
Sometimes hilarious.
But I think it would make sense maybe to go through that list first. Because if there are things on there that are imminent, then we need to figure out how we're going to pay for them, number one. And if there's not going to be enough surplus at the end of this year to do the imminent things, then they need to be rolled into a bond, I would think. So, and that's kind of where that planning would, my thought would be that planning process would go, because then you can kind of say, you can kind of tease out the other things as you go along. I don't know. My thinking would be to prioritize the bottom and then go to the
To
what
decide
we need
which
to
ones,
do.
to decide which ones in the bottom list are things we have to do right away.
or if
We really have no choice. right?
or
Yes.
and are we gonna have enough escrow surplus? Are we gonna have, are they already anticipated into your budget? You know, that kind of thing.
So, Mr. Cummings, can you talk through those various items, or do you need more information on some of them?
Mr. Mayor, I think I can pretty much do it right now, live time, subject to confirming, because I did have this explicit conversation with a lot of the departments. I think I can speak to most of it right now. But so with the qualifier or the caveat that, you know, subject to change, what I've just highlighted in blue are projects that I would suggest are quote-unquote imminent from a public safety standpoint or contractual obligation standpoint, based on either our work with DOT or what this community has expressed in the past as a priority. But these are the various projects in blue that I believe are gonna be prioritized more in like if there's an FY25 escrowing process or an FY26 operational budget process, these blue ones would come first. What's that total?
Alderwoman Clee.
Just a quick question also. I didn't make my point clear because I got caught on my own words. Some of those items that might have matching dollars and so on, if we knew when we thought we were gonna have to have those monies, that would be helpful too. So in other words, if we know that they've approved it, but it's unlikely we're gonna see it for 2 to 3 years, that's something that I'd like to know. And even when and I'm using the Lock Whitney, when that first came about, I remember Sarah and so on saying to me, we're not gonna see that money for 3 to 4 years. And then, of course, COVID happened and it went on, and it's become quite a nightmare. But the bottom line is, some of these things we know, even if they approve it and say yes, we're not gonna need that money for 2 or 3 years. And that kind of helps us determine no?
Mayor, may I?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I would not do that. And here's why. Is because New Hampshire DOT in good faith is working with you, and they want to make sure that you have money set aside, and they're gonna be looking for you to enter into a contract. So you need to have a bona fide source of funds
Okay.
set aside. So I think when we're talking about projects very early on, if we could start planning for that and setting that money aside in an expendable trust fund, and then we monitor and manage that expendable trust fund, you'll have the match that will accrue over time, so you can point to it in good faith and actually enter into some of these agreements. Second to that, it's really hard because when you start the conversation with New Hampshire DOT, you're doing it without any design, and you believe the project cost is gonna be a certain dollar amount. And then after you've waited your 7 to 10 years, or whatever the case may be, and then you start design, you then need to be in a position, in addition to that, to be able to increase that budget, because those total project dollars may not be accurate anymore. And so then you need additional monies then as well. So I would encourage everyone to start planning and setting that money aside upfront. If you believe the project is valuable enough to you today, and you want to do the project, then we need to also financially plan for it as well. And so all of this kind of shows you the imminent projects that we are being asked for now to actually have some monies available for.
You
The
actually just
match
described, I'm sorry, you just described the Lock Street program.
Disaster, yes.
Yeah.
We should have had the money a long
I
time
know,
ago.
Exactly.
But the match projects are the Walnut Street Oval, the Heritage Rail Trail East, the Signal project, right? Those are the match projects.
And to that point, in a prior meeting, I was asked to vet out the exact dollar that was necessary. So we already have about 500,000 sitting aside for the Walnut Street Oval, but what we know now today is we need an additional 300,000 to be able to make our quote-unquote 20% match. So that's why you're only seeing 300,000 being asked for right there. But it's that type of evaluation that is needing to go on, and we don't have anything set aside as of right now for the improved signal coordination project, but we know that that project is imminent and on the horizon, so we need to start planning for it.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So based off my quick calculator math, that's 5,025,000 of kind of more quicker needs. So CFO Griffin, do we have an estimation?
And
of
those are the
surplus
blue
or-
projects?
Yeah, came out to just over 5 million. Is there an estimation of what we're looking at for surpluses this year?
No,
If I may,
Not yet.
Mr. Mayor,
not yet. I'm going to answer for him.
go right ahead.
Way too early.
All right, so we've got, we should think about human affairs. So we've got 6 more minutes. We will, for the next meeting, have a list. I mean, you've seen the project sphere. We'll have a discrete list of the ones we think have to be done, both the smaller projects and the larger ones. And then move on from there. Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, I'm the chair, so I'm just like stealing my own time here, but
All right, so don't give a long
one of the
speech.
former aldermen keeps on bringing, or one of the former speakers who was an alderman keeps bringing up the Lock Street project. Do you recall when the Heritage Trail East project started?
Well, Matt knows, but the we've had some delay over.
Before most of the people in this room.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So-
been a long time.
That was just the point that I was gonna
But
bring up.
that's delayed, not because the money, let me see, not because the money is not available, but because there's a couple of easement issues that are being resolved. So there's a couple little sections where we actually don't have the easement. And before we can begin the actual construction, we have to have the right to build the whole thing.
To that point, though, I don't know, this is more a conversation to have with Alderman Senate, or if I should bring it out, but just brainstorming, because the Heritage Trail Reese proposal would end in proximity in his ward. There was money that was set aside previously as part of a development for a park in that area that I think we sort of already borrowed some for lights.
Yes.
But maybe there's a way to pay for some of these projects out of funds that we don't have a plan for exactly right now, but could at least get close to the original goal of both projects.
I think there's 500,000 left in the category you just mentioned.
Yeah, so the question would be,
We
is it
spent
close enough to
250
actually be a park for
on
the
a
right
light
neighborhood?
thing. Tim, Mr. Cummings.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm hoping maybe for next week, the group will be comfortable to share their priorities. Now that we've gone through this exercise, needs to be a consensus of the group. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to review this information over the next week or two. The end goal here is to be able to tell the finance team what we're comfortable pursuing from a debt service plan this spring during this financial season, ideally during the same budget season that we're working through, so we can stay on track. And then I'll just close my comments by saying this isn't a one-time thing. Ideally, this type of conversation will occur annually in the springtime, and it can be adjusted accordingly with the finance team as you go through the budget season. And whether this group convenes again or whether it's handled a different way, it should be an exercise that this get prioritized every year, and you adjust as new data and information comes forward.
So we will have a list of the discrete list of the necessary projects which we will circulate
Yes, Mayor.
by email, correct?
Yes, Mayor.
Anybody else? Alderwoman Clee.
No, that was actually my comment. As long as we can have this before the next meeting, so we have time to look at it, think about it, potentially call the departments or so on if necessary. I just felt a
Yeah,
little bit
that's
kind
fine.
of back to the
All
wall.
right. Alderman Wilshire.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And the meeting of the committee is adjourned at 7:29 PM. 1 minute to spare.